Something extraordinary is happening in the world of relationships right now, and it's catching everyone off guard. Women over 50 are walking away from traditional relationship dynamics in record numbers, and they're doing it with a confidence that's both surprising and inspiring. They're not angry, they're not bitter, they're simply done playing games they never wanted to play in the first place. What's driving this massive shift? Why are senior women choosing independence over companionship? And what does this mean for the future of relationships? The answers might surprise you, challenge you, and possibly change everything you thought you knew about love, partnership, and what women truly want as they step into their wisdom years. Welcome back to The Heart Code, where we explore the psychology behind relationships, human behavior, and the patterns that shape our lives. If you're new here, this channel is dedicated to understanding the deeper truths about human connection, particularly for women who've lived long enough to know that conventional wisdom doesn't always deliver on its promises. Before we dive into today's topic, I want to ask you for your support. If this video resonates with you, please hit that like button. It helps us reach more women who need to hear these messages. Drop a comment below sharing your thoughts or experiences. Your voice matters, and your story might be exactly what another viewer needs to hear today. Share this video with the women in your life who might benefit from this perspective. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss our content. We're building a community of women who refuse to settle for less than they deserve, and your participation makes this community stronger. For those who want to support the channel in additional ways, the Super Thanks feature is available, and every contribution helps us continue creating content that challenges narratives and empowers women to make informed decisions about their lives. Today, we're tackling a phenomenon that's been quietly building for years but is now impossible to ignore. Women in their 50s, 60s, 70s, and beyond are fundamentally changing their relationship with romantic relationships. They're not desperately seeking partners. They're not settling for mediocrity. Many aren't even interested anymore. And this isn't about giving up on love. It's about something far more profound. It's about finally, after decades, putting themselves first. The Great Awakening, when experience becomes wisdom. Let's start with what's really happening here, because the surface explanation doesn't capture the full picture. When we say senior women don't care about men anymore, we're not talking about hatred or resentment. We're talking about indifference, which is actually far more powerful. Indifference means the game has lost its appeal. The prize no longer seems worth the effort, and that shift represents one of the most significant relationship transformations of our time. Women who've reached their senior years have accumulated something that younger women are still building. They have decades of lived experience. They've been through marriages, divorces, partnerships, disappointments, and revelations. They've raised children, built careers, supported partners, maintained households, and somewhere along the way, many of them looked around and realized they'd been giving far more than they'd been receiving. This isn't a sudden realization. It's a slow accumulation of moments, observations, and patterns that finally reach a tipping point. It's the hundreds of times they managed their partner's emotions while their own were dismissed. It's the decades of invisible labor that went unacknowledged. It's the compromise after compromise that somehow always seemed to flow in one direction. It's the dreams deferred, the ambitions shelved, the personal growth postponed because someone else's needs always seemed more urgent. And then something shifts. Maybe it's a divorce, maybe it's widowhood, maybe it's just hitting a certain age and realizing that time is finite and precious. Whatever the catalyst, these women wake up and ask themselves a question they might never have seriously considered before. What if I just focused on me? What if I built a life around my own happiness, my own interests, my own peace? What if I stopped trying to fit into someone else's vision of what my life should look like? The answer to that question is transforming the landscape of senior relationships, because once women start prioritizing themselves, many of them discover something revolutionary. They're actually happier alone. Not lonely, not isolated, not waiting for someone to complete them. Just genuinely content with their own company and the life they've built for themselves. The economics of emotional labor. Let's talk about something that doesn't get nearly enough attention in relationship discussions. Emotional labor. This term has gained traction in recent years, but senior women have been living this reality for their entire adult lives. They just didn't have the language to name it. Emotional labor is the invisible work of managing feelings, anticipating needs, mediating conflicts, and maintaining the emotional well-being of everyone around you. It's remembering birthdays, managing social calendars, monitoring the emotional temperature of the household, knowing when to push and when to soothe, carrying the mental load of what needs to happen for life to run smoothly. For generations, this work has fallen disproportionately on women, and it's exhausting. But here's what makes it particularly insidious. Because it's invisible, it's rarely acknowledged, rarely appreciated, and certainly not valued in any tangible way. The woman who manages all of this is just doing what's expected. She's being a good wife, a good mother, a good partner. Nobody celebrates her for it. Nobody offers to take over. And if she stops doing it, everything falls apart. And somehow that becomes her fault too. Senior women have spent decades performing this emotional labor, often while also working full-time jobs, managing households, and suppressing their own needs and desires. And many of them have reached a point where they're simply done. They've calculated the cost-benefit analysis of relationships, and the numbers don't work in favor of partnership. When a woman in her 60s looks at the prospect of a new relationship, she's not seeing it through the romantic lens of her 20s or even her 40s. She's seeing it through the practical lens of someone who knows exactly what partnership typically requires from her. She's seeing the emotional labor, the accommodation, the compromise, the caretaking that will likely be expected. And she's asking herself a very reasonable question. Why would I sign up for that again? The harsh reality is that many heterosexual relationships still operate on traditional dynamics where women do the majority of emotional and domestic labor, even when both partners work. Study after study confirms this. Women spend more time on household tasks. They carry more of the mental load. They do more emotional caretaking, and this pattern often intensifies as couples age, particularly if the male partner experiences health issues. Senior women have watched their friends become full-time caregivers to ailing husbands while their own needs go unmet. They've seen women sacrifice their retirement dreams to accommodate a partner's limitations. They've witnessed the pattern play out over and over. The man gets sick, the woman cares for him. The woman gets sick, she still manages most of the household, while also dealing with her illness. These women aren't blind to these patterns. They're acutely aware of them, and many are choosing to opt out entirely. The freedom of financial independence. Let's address one of the most practical factors driving this shift. Financial independence. Previous generations of women often needed marriage for economic security. A woman without a husband faced significant financial challenges and social stigma. But that's changed dramatically, particularly for women who are now in their senior years. Many women in this age group have had full careers. They have their own retirement savings, their own social security, their own homes, their own financial security. They don't need a man's income to survive. This changes everything about how they approach relationships. When financial necessity is removed from the equation, what's left is a much more honest assessment of what a relationship actually offers. And for many senior women, that honest assessment doesn't look particularly appealing. Without the economic imperative, they're free to ask whether partnership genuinely enhances their life or merely complicates it. This financial independence also provides freedom from one of the oldest relationship dynamics, the provider-dependent structure that shaped so many traditional marriages. Women who have their own resources don't need to tolerate poor treatment, incompatibility, or unhappiness for the sake of financial security. They can walk away, and increasingly, they are. But it's not just about having the option to leave. It's about having the option to never enter in the first place. A financially secure woman in her 60s doesn't need to date for economic reasons. She can be genuinely selective. She can set high standards. And if nobody meets those standards, she can simply continue living her life exactly as she wants, without compromise. This is a level of freedom that most women in previous generations never experienced. And once women taste that freedom, many of them are reluctant to give it up. They've seen what traditional relationships often require from them, and they've decided the price is too high. The pattern recognition, that comes with age. Here's something that's rarely discussed openly, but it's absolutely central to understanding why senior women are stepping back from romantic relationships. Pattern recognition. By the time a woman reaches her 50s or 60s, she's seen enough to recognize patterns, not just in her own relationships, but in the relationships all around her. She's watched her friends, her sisters, her colleagues, her mother. She's observed what tends to happen in long-term heterosexual partnerships. And the patterns aren't particularly encouraging. She's noticed that even in partnerships that look equal on the surface, women typically do more household management, more emotional labor, more accommodating, more adjusting, more sacrificing, and often they receive less appreciation, less consideration, less support, less reciprocity. She's watched women support their husbands through career changes, health crises, identity struggles, and midlife crises, only to be left for someone younger or simply taken for granted after decades of dedication. She's seen women shelve their own ambitions to support their partner's dreams, only to find themselves forgotten when those dreams are achieved. She's observed how society treats aging men versus aging women, how men are distinguished as they gray, while women are pressured to fight every sign of aging, how men are allowed to be imperfect while women are expected to be endlessly patient, endlessly understanding, endlessly accommodating. She's noticed that when couples disagree, women are usually the ones expected to compromise. When someone needs to sacrifice for the good of the family, it's usually the woman. When careers need to be prioritized, it's usually his. When someone needs emotional support, she provides it. When she needs emotional support, she's often told she's being too sensitive or too demanding. These aren't just observations. They're decades of lived experience. And at a certain point, that experience crystallizes into a very clear understanding. The traditional relationship structure wasn't designed for her benefit. It was designed to support men while extracting maximum labor from women. And once you see that pattern clearly, it's very difficult to unsee it. This is why you'll hear senior women say things like, "I've already raised my children, I'm not looking to raise another man." It's not cruelty, it's pattern recognition. They've noticed that many men expect their female partners to perform maternal functions, managing their schedule, monitoring their health, remembering important dates, mediating their family relationships, managing their social life, even laying out their clothes or cooking their meals. These women have spent decades in caretaking roles, and they're not interested in continuing that dynamic in their romantic relationships. The rediscovery of self. One of the most powerful aspects of this phenomenon is what happens when women step away from the relationship marketplace. They rediscover themselves. This might sound dramatic, but it's a consistent theme you'll hear when you talk to senior women who've chosen to focus on themselves rather than seeking partnership. Many women spent their younger years defining themselves through relationships and roles. They were someone's wife, someone's mother, someone's daughter, someone's employee. Their identity was largely relational, built around how they fit into other people's lives. Their own desires, interests, and ambitions often took a backseat to the needs of others. But when women reach their senior years and step back from active relationship seeking, something remarkable happens. They have time, they have space, they have permission, perhaps for the first time in their adult lives, to ask themselves fundamental questions. Who am I? What do I actually enjoy? What are my interests? What makes me happy? What do I want to do with my remaining years? The answers to these questions often surprise them. They discover interests they never had time to explore. They reconnect with passions they abandoned decades ago. They build friendships that are deeper and more fulfilling than many romantic relationships they've experienced. They travel to places they've always wanted to see. They take classes, start hobbies, volunteer for causes they care about, or simply enjoy the luxury of structuring their days exactly as they please. This isn't selfishness, it's self-discovery. And for many women, it's a revelation. They realize they actually like themselves. They enjoy their own company. They're interesting, capable, complete people who don't need another person to validate their existence or fill their time. This rediscovery often leads to a profound shift in how they view relationships. Partnership stops being a necessity and becomes, at best, an enhancement. And here's the critical part. If partnership is merely an enhancement rather than a necessity, the bar for what kind of partnership is worth pursuing becomes much higher. A relationship has to genuinely add value. It has to enhance an already satisfying life. It can't just be okay or good enough. It has to be genuinely excellent. Otherwise, why bother? And this is where many senior women find themselves. They've built lives they genuinely enjoy. They're content, fulfilled, engaged in activities and relationships that matter to them. A romantic relationship would have to be truly exceptional to justify disrupting that contentment. It would have to offer something valuable enough to warrant the compromise, accommodation, and emotional labor that relationships typically require. For most of the men they encounter, that bar is simply too high. The reality of the dating pool. Let's be honest about something that often goes unspoken. The senior dating pool is challenging, and not in ways that favor women's happiness. Women who do consider dating after divorce or widowhood often find the reality deeply disappointing. Many men in this age range are looking for a nurse or a purse. They want someone to take care of them as they age, manage their health care, cook their meals, and handle the daily tasks of living. Or they want access to a woman's financial resources, her home, her retirement savings. What they often don't want is an equal partnership with a woman who has her own interests, opinions, and life. Senior women report encountering men who haven't done the work of self-reflection or personal growth. Men who are still emotionally stunted, still expecting women to manage their feelings, still operating from entitlement rather than genuine interest in partnership. Men who've learned nothing from their previous relationships and are looking to repeat the same patterns with a new woman. There's also the age gap issue. Many senior men pursue women significantly younger than themselves, while simultaneously being unwilling to date women their own age. A 70-year-old man might be seeking a 50-year-old woman, while 70-year-old women struggle to find age-appropriate partners who actually want to date them rather than someone younger. This creates a situation where senior women look at what's available and make a rational calculation. Is this worth my time and energy? Is there anyone in this pool who actually offers something I want? And increasingly, the answer is no. Not because these women have impossibly high standards, but because they have reasonable standards and the reality doesn't meet them. Add to this the fact that many senior women are more educated, more emotionally intelligent, and more socially adept than the men in their age range, and you have a recipe for fundamental incompatibility. These women have grown, learned, evolved, and developed themselves over decades. Many of the available men have not. The gap in emotional maturity, intellectual curiosity, and personal development is often too wide to bridge. The health factor. Here's a reality that influences many senior women's decisions about relationships. Healthcare and caregiving. Women statistically outlive men, and they're also statistically more likely to end up as caregivers. Senior women have watched their friends, mothers, and sisters spend the last years of their lives caring for ailing husbands. They've seen women in their 70s and 80s providing full-time care to partners with dementia, mobility issues, chronic illness, and disability. This isn't abstract for them. It's a likely future if they partner with someone. And here's what makes it particularly difficult. The reciprocity often isn't there. Studies show that men are far more likely to leave sick partners than women are. When a woman gets seriously ill, her male partner is significantly more likely to leave the relationship than when the situation is reversed. Women know this. They've seen it happen. So when a senior woman considers entering a relationship, she's weighing the likelihood that she'll end up as an unpaid caregiver against the likelihood that she'll receive similar care if she needs it. The odds aren't in her favor. She's looking at a situation where she's statistically likely to spend her final healthy years caring for someone else, with no guarantee of reciprocal care when she needs it. This is a practical consideration, not a selfish one. These women are making rational decisions about how they want to spend their remaining years, and many are concluding that devoting those years to caring for a partner who would likely not do the same for them is not how they want to live. The friendship advantage. Here's something that doesn't get enough emphasis in discussions about why senior women are stepping back from romantic relationships. They have fulfilling social lives without them. Unlike the stereotype of the lonely single woman, many senior women have rich, deep friendships that provide emotional connection, companionship, shared activities, and genuine support. These friendships are often more reciprocal, more emotionally satisfying, and more reliable than the romantic relationships they've experienced. Female friendships in later life tend to be characterized by mutual understanding, emotional intelligence, and genuine care that flows in both directions. Women support each other through illness, loss, life transitions, and daily challenges. They celebrate each other's successes. They listen without trying to fix or dismiss. They show up. When you have friendships like this, the appeal of romantic partnership decreases dramatically. What does a romantic relationship offer that you can't get from friends, family, and community? Sexual access, which we've already discussed, is often not particularly appealing. Cohabitation, which many women actually don't want. Social legitimacy as part of a couple, which matters less and less as women age and care less about others' approval. The things that romantic relationships are supposed to provide: emotional intimacy, companionship, shared experiences, support. Many senior women are already getting from their friendships, and they're getting them without the complications, compromises, and frustrations that often come with romantic partnerships. This is why you'll hear women in this demographic say things like, "My friends are my family," or "I don't need a man, I have my girlfriends." It's not defensive, it's genuinely true. They've built social networks that meet their needs for connection and community, A romantic partner would have to offer something these friendships don't, and that's a high bar. The media myth versus lived reality. Senior women are also dealing with a significant disconnect between what media and culture tells them relationships should be, and what their lived experience has taught them relationships actually are. Romantic comedies, novels, and cultural narratives present partnership as the ultimate source of happiness, fulfillment, and life satisfaction. You're supposed to find your person, fall in love, and live happily ever after. But senior women have lived long enough to know that's mostly fiction. They've experienced the reality of long-term relationships, the boredom, the frustration, the disappointment, the work, the compromise, the realization that love doesn't conquer all and sometimes doesn't even survive the mundane challenges of daily life. They've learned that marriage or partnership doesn't guarantee happiness. In fact, they've often found the opposite. Many women report being happier after divorce or widowhood than they were in their marriages. They describe a sense of relief, freedom, and rediscovery of self that partnership had suppressed. This creates a situation where cultural messaging is pushing them toward relationships, while their own experience is telling them relationships often don't deliver on their promises. And at this stage of life, most senior women trust their experience over cultural narratives. They're not naive young women who still believe in fairy tales. They're seasoned veterans who know the difference between fantasy and reality. So when society tells them they should be seeking partnership, when family members express concern about them being alone, when dating sites target them with messages about finding love at any age, these women are increasingly responding with skepticism and disinterest. They've been sold a bill of goods before. They're not buying it again. The power of no. Let's talk about something that represents a profound shift in how senior women approach relationships: the power and freedom of saying no. Women are socialized from childhood to be accommodating, to put others first, to smooth over conflicts, to make others comfortable, to say yes even when they want to say no. It takes many women decades to unlearn this conditioning, but senior women have often reached a point where they've stopped performing that conditioning. They've earned the right to say no without explanation, justification, or apology. No, I don't want to date. No, I'm not interested in a relationship. No, I don't want to compromise my lifestyle for partnership. No, I'm not looking to take care of someone. No, I don't want to make my life smaller to accommodate someone else. This ability to say no and mean it without guilt or second guessing is incredibly powerful. It's also relatively new for many women. They spent their younger years saying yes to things they didn't want, yes to sex they weren't interested in, yes to commitments that drained them, yes to relationships that didn't serve them, yes to expectations that weren't fair. They said yes because that's what good women did. Now they're saying no, and discovering that no is a complete sentence. No doesn't need to be softened or explained or justified. No is simply no. This is revolutionary for women who spent lifetimes managing others' feelings and expectations. This power extends beyond just relationships. Senior women are saying no to social expectations, family pressure, internalized sexism, and cultural narratives about how they should live. They're rejecting the idea that women need to remain sexually available, romantically interested, and relationship-focused regardless of their own preferences. They're claiming the right to define their own lives on their own terms. And here's what's interesting. Once women start exercising this power to say no, once they experience the freedom and peace that comes from prioritizing their own preferences, many of them become even less interested in relationships, because relationships often require a lot of yeses. Yes to compromise, yes to accommodation, yes to considering someone else's needs and preferences, yes to negotiating, adjusting, and adapting. These women have discovered that saying no feels better, and if given the choice between a life built on no's that protect their peace and a relationship built on yeses that compromise it, they're choosing the no's. The invisible labor problem. We touched on emotional labor earlier, but there's another dimension to this that deserves deeper exploration. The invisible labor that women perform in relationships extends far beyond emotional caretaking. It includes all the behind-the-scenes work that makes life function smoothly, but goes completely unnoticed until it stops happening. This is the mental load of remembering everyone's schedules, anticipating needs, managing household inventory, planning meals, coordinating social obligations, maintaining family relationships, remembering birthdays and important dates, managing healthcare appointments, and generally ensuring that life runs without friction. It's invisible because when it's done well, everything just works. Nobody notices all the micro decisions, preparations, and organizational work that went into making things work seamlessly. Senior women have performed this invisible labor for decades. They've managed not just their own lives, but entire family systems. They've been the hub around which everything else rotated, and very often this work was not only unappreciated, but literally invisible to the people benefiting from it. Husbands would genuinely not understand what their wives did all day because the labor was so invisible they couldn't perceive it. Now, when these women consider new relationships, they're acutely aware of this dynamic. They know that if they partner with someone, they'll likely be expected to resume this invisible labor, managing his schedule, remembering his family obligations, coordinating social plans, handling household management. It will fall to them because that's what women do, and because most men have never learned to see or value this work enough to take equal responsibility for it. And senior women are rejecting this. They're done being invisible laborers. They're done managing everything while their work goes unacknowledged. If they're going to do all this work anyway, they'd rather do it only for themselves, where they can at least appreciate their own efforts and enjoy the fruits of their own labor without also having to manage someone else's life. This is a crucial piece of why these women don't want relationships. It's not just about what men do wrong, it's about what women have been doing right all along without recognition and their refusal to continue performing unvalued labor. The comparison factor. Here's something that influences senior women's disinterest in relationships, but doesn't get discussed openly enough. They're comparing their single lives to their married or partnered lives, and the single life is winning. This is significant because it contradicts everything we're told about relationships being essential for happiness. Women who've been through divorce or widowhood often report that their single life is better than their married life was. Not just different, better. They have more freedom, more peace, more time, more energy, more money, more space, more autonomy. They make decisions without having to negotiate. They structure their days according to their own preferences. They don't have to accommodate someone else's habits, preferences, needs, or limitations. This doesn't mean their marriages were terrible, although some were. It means that even decent marriages came with costs that are now visible in their absence. The daily negotiations, the emotional management, the compromise, the accommodation, the suppression of self that partnership required. Women didn't fully realize how much energy all of that took until they stopped doing it. And now that they've experienced the alternative, now that they know what life looks like when they only have to consider their own needs and preferences, many of them have zero interest in going back. They're not nostalgic for partnership. They're not lonely for couple life. They're genuinely happier as individuals. This is particularly true for women who were in traditional marriages where they performed the majority of household and emotional labor. Post-divorce or post-widowhood, their workload actually decreases. They're no longer managing another adult's life. They're not doing his laundry, cooking his meals, managing his schedule. catering to his preferences. Even though they're now solely responsible for everything in their own lives, the total work is often less because they've subtracted the labor of maintaining another person. The comparison is even starker when these women observe coupled friends. They watch their married friends still performing those same patterns, still compromising, still accommodating, still doing the bulk of household and emotional labor, still working around someone else's needs. And they think, why would I want that? They've tasted freedom and it's too sweet to give up. The evolutionary psychology question. Let's dig into something controversial but relevant. Evolutionary psychology, perspectives on relationships and aging. There are theories that suggest men are biologically driven to seek younger partners for reproductive reasons, while women's mate preferences change differently with age. Whether or not you subscribe to evolutionary psychology explanations, the pattern is observable. Older men often pursue younger women. This leaves older women without age-appropriate partners who are actually interested in them. But here's what's interesting. Many senior women don't actually care. They're not devastated by men their age preferring younger women. They're actually relieved, because those men pursuing younger women are removing themselves from the pool of potential partners, and senior women are generally fine with that. If a man in his 60s or 70s is primarily focused on a woman's age and appearance rather than her character, intelligence, life experience, and compatibility, he's not someone most senior women want anyway. His self-selection out of the age-appropriate dating pool is doing them a favor. There's also a shift in women's priorities that evolutionary psychology might explain. Women who are past reproductive age are freed from biological imperatives that may have shaped their earlier relationship choices. They're not subconsciously evaluating potential partners based on provider potential or genetic fitness. They're evaluating based on actual compatibility, personality, and whether the person would genuinely enhance their life. This clarity of purpose, freed from unconscious biological drives, might explain why senior women have such clear and uncompromising standards. They know exactly what they want because there are no underlying biological imperatives clouding their judgment. And what they want, it turns out, is either an exceptional partner who genuinely adds value to an already satisfying life, or no partner at all. The middle ground of okay or good enough no longer appeals. The cultural shift in female independence. What we're witnessing with senior women's relationship choices is part of a larger cultural shift in female independence that's been building for generations. Each generation of women has had more options, more rights, more independence than the generation before. Senior women today are the beneficiaries of decades of feminist progress. Even if they don't identify with feminist labels, they have legal rights their mothers didn't have. They've had career opportunities their grandmothers couldn't imagine. They have financial independence that wasn't available to previous generations of women. They have divorce rights, property rights, reproductive rights that were fought for by the women who came before them. And all of this adds up to genuine choice about whether and how to partner. This is historically unprecedented. For most of human history, women needed marriage for economic survival, social legitimacy, and physical protection. Women who remained unmarried or who left marriages faced poverty, social ostracism, and vulnerability. Marriage wasn't really a choice. It was a necessity. That's no longer true, at least not in developed nations for women with resources. And senior women are the first generation to reach later life with genuine options. They're not dependent on men for survival. They're not socially ruined by being single. They're not vulnerable in ways that make partnership necessary. So, for the first time in human history, large numbers of women can ask themselves a genuine question. Do I actually want a romantic partner? Not do I need one for survival or social acceptance, but do I genuinely want one for my own happiness and fulfillment? And increasingly, the answer is no. Not because men are worse than they used to be, though that's debatable, but because women finally have the option to say no and the experience to know that no might actually be the better answer. The peace they've found. Let's talk about what senior women have instead of romantic relationships, because that's often missing from these discussions. Peace, calm, contentment, self-determination, freedom, joy in simple pleasures, connection with friends and family, engagement with interests and passions, a sense of self that isn't defined by relationship to others. This peace is hard-won. Many of these women went through difficult divorces, painful losses, years of therapy, deep self-examination, and significant personal growth to reach this place. They've done the work of healing from past hurts, understanding their patterns, setting boundaries, and building lives they genuinely enjoy. And that peace is precious to them. It's not something they're willing to risk on a relationship that might not work out. They've learned that their peace of mind is more valuable than having a partner. They've learned that being alone is not the same as being lonely. They've learned that they can provide for their own emotional needs, their own companionship, their own fulfillment. This peace manifests in daily life in ways that are profound but might seem small to outside observers. It's waking up when they want, not when someone else's alarm goes off. It's eating what they want when they want. It's decorating their space exactly as they like it. It's spending their money on their priorities. It's planning their days around their interests. It's not having to check in, explain, justify, or accommodate. It's the absence of conflict, tension, and negotiation that relationship often brings. It's not walking on eggshells around someone's mood. It's not managing someone else's feelings. It's not having to be careful about what you say or how you say it. It's not dealing with someone's disappointment, criticism, or demands. Women who've found this peace are very protective of it, and rightly so. They know how rare and valuable it is. They know how easy it is to lose, and they know that most romantic relationships would threaten it, so they choose peace over partnership, and they don't regret it. The standards escalation. Here's something crucial to understand about senior women and relationships. Their standards haven't just remained high, they've escalated dramatically. When you've lived long enough to know what you want, what you won't tolerate, and what you deserve, you become far more selective. And when you're genuinely content alone, you have no reason to lower your standards. These women aren't looking for just anyone. They're not lonely enough or desperate enough to settle. If they were to consider partnership, it would have to be with someone truly exceptional, someone who's done his own emotional work, someone who understands reciprocity, emotional intelligence, and equal partnership, someone who doesn't expect her to manage his life, his feelings, or his growth, someone who adds genuine value rather than creating work. The problem is that men meeting these standards are extraordinarily rare in any age group, and perhaps particularly rare among men in the senior demographic. Many men in this age group haven't done the personal development work that women have. They haven't had to. Society hasn't required it of them. So there's a fundamental mismatch between what senior women want and what's actually available in the dating pool. Women are looking for emotional maturity, and they're finding emotional stunting. They're looking for genuine partnership, and they're finding men seeking traditional dynamics where women service men's needs. They're looking for someone who's interesting, self-aware, and evolved, and they're finding men who haven't grown since their 20s. This isn't about women having impossible standards. It's about women having reasonable standards that reflect what they've learned about what makes for good partnership. And when the available options don't meet those standards, these women make the rational choice to opt out rather than compromise. The escalation of standards also reflects something else. These women know themselves better than they ever have. They know their non-negotiables, they know their triggers, they know what they need in order to be happy, and they're not willing to compromise on those things. Why would they? They've already compromised too much in their lives. This is their time to be uncompromising, to insist on what they need, to refuse to settle. The honesty factor. Senior women have often reached a place of radical honesty, both with themselves and others. They're done pretending, done performing, done saying what others want to hear. This honesty extends to how they think and talk about relationships. While younger women might soften their relationship preferences or concerns to avoid seeming difficult or demanding, senior women often don't bother. They'll tell you straight out that they don't want to take care of another person, that they're not interested in managing someone else's life, that they've earned their peace and aren't giving it up lightly, that the benefits of partnership would have to significantly outweigh the costs, and they're not seeing evidence that they would. This honesty can seem harsh to people who are used to women softening their truths, but it's actually refreshing and healthy. These women are being authentic about what they want and don't want. They're not playing games or sending mixed signals. They're communicating clearly that they're not available for relationships that don't genuinely serve them. This honesty also extends to how they view their past relationships. Many senior women can now look back and acknowledge that their marriages or partnerships had significant problems, that they weren't as happy as they pretended to be, that they were doing far more than their fair share, that they settled for less than they deserved because they didn't think they had options. This retrospective clarity is part of why they're so clear about what they want now. They've learned from experience. They've identified the patterns that didn't work, and they're determined not to repeat those mistakes. If that means being single for the rest of their lives, so be it. They'd rather be alone than in another relationship that requires them to shrink, settle, or sacrifice. The future of senior relationships. So where does this leave us? What does it mean for the future of relationships as more women reach their senior years with resources, independence, and experience? It suggests we're heading toward a fundamental reshaping of relationship norms at all stages of life, but particularly in later years. We might see a continued increase in single senior women who are genuinely happy and fulfilled, not waiting for someone, not lonely, not incomplete, just content with lives they've built for themselves. This challenges every cultural narrative about women needing partnership to be complete. We might see new relationship structures emerge, women who are open to partnership, but only on radically different terms than traditional relationship norms. Living apart together arrangements where people maintain separate households and lives, but share connection and companionship. Very clear relationship contracts that specify expectations and boundaries. Relationships that don't default to cohabitation, marriage, or traditional roles. We might see men forced to evolve if they want partnership with women their own age. The old patterns aren't working anymore. Women aren't accepting them. Men who want meaningful relationships with senior women will need to offer genuine partnership, emotional intelligence, reciprocity, and value. They'll need to have done their own work. They'll need to be truly exceptional because these women aren't settling anymore. We might see broader cultural acceptance of single women, particularly single senior women, as valid and complete. The pitying narrative around single older women is already outdated. Most of these women aren't objects of pity. They're living their best lives, often more happily than their coupled peers. The shift we're witnessing isn't temporary. It's not going to reverse. Each generation of women is learning from the generation before. They're watching their mothers, aunts, and older friends claim independence and peace in their later years. They're seeing that it's possible to be happy alone, that partnership isn't essential, that choosing yourself isn't selfish. Younger women are already applying these lessons. They're more selective, they're more willing to walk away, they're less willing to settle. They're building lives that don't depend on romantic relationships for fulfillment. The pattern that's so visible in senior women is already starting in younger cohorts. In 30 years, we might look back on traditional relationship norms as quaint relics of a time when women had fewer options. The grief they're not feeling. Here's something that surprises many people about senior women who've stepped away from relationships. They're not grieving. Society expects them to be sad, wistful, or regretful about being single, but most aren't. They're not mourning the absence of partnership. They're celebrating the presence of freedom. This is perhaps the most telling aspect of this entire phenomenon. If women were genuinely happier in relationships, if partnerships were truly serving women's needs and well-being, you'd expect single women to be grieving that loss. But they're not. They're not sad about being alone. They're relieved. They're content. They're thriving. This absence of grief is data. It tells us something important about what those relationships were actually providing. If you're not sad about something being gone, it probably wasn't serving you well to begin with. And that's what we're seeing. Women are looking back at their marriages and partnerships without nostalgia. They're looking at the prospect of new relationships without longing. The grief isn't there because there's nothing to grieve. What they sometimes do grieve is the time they spent in relationships that weren't right for them, the years they gave to partnerships that didn't reciprocate, the dreams they deferred, the parts of themselves they suppressed. That's what they wish they could have back. Not the relationships themselves, but the time and energy they invested in them. This absence of grief, this presence of contentment is revolutionary. It's telling us that women don't actually need romantic relationships the way we've been told they do. It's revealing that partnership has often been serving men far better than women. And it's showing us that women's happiness might actually increase when they step away from traditional relationship structures. The questions they're not asking anymore. Senior women who've stepped away from the relationship marketplace have stopped asking certain questions that once consumed their energy. Am I attractive enough? Am I too demanding? Should I lower my standards? Am I being too picky? What if I end up alone? What will people think? Is something wrong with me for not wanting this? The absence of these questions is freeing. These women have reached a place where they've stopped questioning their own validity, worth, and choices. They've stopped looking to external validation. They've stopped trying to fit themselves into molds that don't actually fit. They're not asking if they're too old for love. They're not worried about their desirability. They're not concerned about social judgment. They've transcended those anxieties that keep younger women tied to relationship seeking, even when it's not serving them. This freedom from doubt is powerful. It allows them to trust their own judgment, to honor their own preferences, to live according to their own values rather than society's expectations. And it makes them largely immune to the pressure and manipulation that sometimes keeps women in unsatisfying relationships. You can't convince a senior woman who's happy alone that she needs a relationship. You can't make her doubt her choices by suggesting she'll regret being single or by painting dire pictures of lonely old age. She knows her own experience. She trusts it more than your projections, and she's genuinely unbothered by others' concerns about her relationship status. The legacy they're creating, senior women who are choosing peace over partnership, are creating a legacy for younger women. Even if they don't realize it, they're modeling a different way of living. They're showing that women can be complete, fulfilled, and happy without romantic relationships. They're demonstrating that choosing yourself isn't selfish, it's self-respecting. Younger women are watching. They're seeing their mothers, aunts, and grandmothers thrive in singlehood. They're learning that there are alternatives to traditional relationship structures. They're understanding that partnership is optional, not obligatory. And this knowledge is changing how they approach their own relationships. This intergenerational transfer of wisdom is significant. For generations, women taught their daughters that marriage was essential, that compromise was necessary, that women's role was to support men. But now senior women are teaching different lessons. They're teaching that your peace matters, that your needs are important, that you don't have to settle, that being alone is better than being in a relationship that diminishes you. This new wisdom is reshaping relationship dynamics at all ages. Women in their 20s are more selective because they've watched their grandmothers finally claim their independence in their 70s, and they don't want to wait that long. Women in their 30s are walking away from mediocre relationships because they've seen their mothers finally admit they're happier divorced. Women in their 40s are refusing to settle because they've watched their aunts build satisfying single lives. The legacy isn't just about relationships. It's about autonomy, self-determination, and the right to define your own life on your own terms. These senior women are proving that it's never too late to choose yourself, that you can build a satisfying life at any age, that happiness doesn't require a partner, and that message is powerful for women at every stage of life. What men could learn. If men are confused or upset by senior women's disinterest in relationships, there are lessons here worth considering. The patterns that got us to this point are clear. Generations of women performing disproportionate emotional and domestic labor. Generations of women accommodating and compromising while men remained relatively rigid. Generations of women's needs being secondary to men's. Generations of unreciprocated care and service. Senior women's withdrawal from relationships is a response to those patterns. They're not being difficult or unreasonable. They're making rational decisions based on lived experience. They've learned what traditional relationships typically require from women, and they've decided the price is too high. Men who want meaningful relationships with women their own age need to understand this. The old patterns aren't working anymore. Women aren't accepting them. You can't expect a woman to perform traditional feminine roles while you maintain traditional masculine privileges. You can't expect her to manage your life, your emotions, and your household while claiming you're in an equal partnership. What would make senior women more interested in relationships? Genuine partnership where labor is truly shared, emotional maturity and intelligence, self-awareness and personal growth, recognition of and appreciation for the work women do, reciprocity in all aspects of the relationship, the ability to communicate, compromise, and consider her needs as important as your own. But here's the thing, by the time men reach their senior years, if they haven't developed these qualities already, they're unlikely to develop them now. The men who would make good partners for senior women are rare because most men haven't been required to develop partnership skills. Society has allowed and even encouraged them to remain emotionally stunted, to expect service from women, to prioritize their own needs and preferences. So the solution isn't simple. It's not just about individual men trying harder. It's about systemic patterns that have shaped how men and women relate to each other. And those patterns are deeply entrenched. But the fact that women are opting out, that they're choosing peace over partnership, is itself a force for change. It's economic pressure in the relationship marketplace. If men want partnership with women their own age, they'll have to evolve. The question is whether enough of them will. The truth they've discovered. Ultimately, what senior women have discovered is a truth that society has worked very hard to obscure. Women don't need men the way we've been told women need men. Partnership can enhance life, but it's not essential for happiness, fulfillment, or completeness. Women are whole people who can build satisfying lives without romantic relationships. This truth has always been true. But previous generations of women didn't have the resources or options to live according to it. They needed marriage for economic security. They needed partnership for social legitimacy. They were socialized to believe they were incomplete without a man. They were denied the education, career opportunities, and legal rights that would have given them alternatives. Senior women today are the first generation to reach later life with genuine options. And what they're revealing through their choices is that when women have real alternatives, many of them choose not to partner, not because they hate men or have given up on love, but because they've calculated the cost-benefit analysis and found that single life actually offers more happiness, peace, and freedom than partnered life typically does. This is the truth that makes people uncomfortable. It challenges fundamental assumptions about gender, relationships, and what makes for a good life. It suggests that traditional relationship structures have been serving men's interests far better than women's. It raises questions about why we've been so invested in pushing women toward partnership, even when it often doesn't serve them well. But discomfort with truth doesn't make it less true. And senior women aren't concerned with making others comfortable anymore. They've spent enough of their lives managing others' comfort. Now they're living according to what they've learned about themselves and about relationships. And what they've learned has led many of them to step away from the relationship marketplace entirely. So here we are, millions of senior women choosing peace, freedom, and independence over romantic relationships, not because they're broken or damaged, not because they're bitter or man-hating, but because they've lived long enough to know what they want, what they don't want, and what they're worth. They've done the math, and partnership as it typically exists doesn't add up to a better life for them. This is a revolutionary moment. For the first time in history, large numbers of women are genuinely choosing to be single, not because they have to, but because they want to. They're building lives that are full, rich, satisfying, and entirely their own. They're proving that women don't need rescuing, completing, or partnering to be whole and happy. What does this mean for the future? It means we're heading toward a fundamental reshaping of relationship norms. It means younger women are learning that they have options. It means men who want meaningful relationships will need to offer genuine partnership. It means being single will become increasingly normalized and valued as a legitimate life choice. If you're a senior woman who's chosen this path, know that you're not alone. You're part of a movement, whether you intended to be or not. You're modeling a different way of being for the women who come after you. Your peace, your independence, your contentment matters. And you're teaching the world that women's happiness doesn't require romantic partnership. If you're a younger woman watching this phenomenon, understand what these senior women are teaching you. Don't wait until your 70s to prioritize yourself. Don't spend decades in relationships that don't serve you. Don't settle for less than genuine partnership. Build a life you love on your own terms, and let relationships enhance rather than define that life. And if you're a man trying to understand why women your age aren't interested, listen to what these women are telling you through their choices. They're not asking for much. They're asking for genuine partnership, reciprocity, emotional maturity, and mutual respect. The fact that these requests seem like high standards tells you everything you need to know about how traditional relationships have functioned. Before we close, I want to ask for your continued support. If this video resonated with you, please hit that like button. Your engagement helps us reach more people who need this message. Comment below with your thoughts, your experiences, your perspective. Are you a senior woman who's chosen independence? Are you a younger woman learning from this generation? Share your voice. Share this video with others who might benefit from this perspective. Subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and turn on notifications. We create content that challenges conventional wisdom about relationships, that empowers women to make informed choices, and that speaks truths that aren't always comfortable but are necessary. Your subscription helps us continue this work. And if you'd like to support the channel financially, the Super Thanks feature is available. Every contribution helps us create more content, reach more people, and build this community of women who refuse to settle for less than they deserve. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being part of this conversation. Thank you for being willing to question conventional wisdom and consider different perspectives. The fact that you're watching this video means you're someone who thinks critically about relationships and life choices, and the world needs more people like you. Remember, your happiness matters. Your peace matters. Your life is yours to design, and you don't owe anyone a romantic relationship just because society says you should have one. Live according to your truth, honor your needs, and build a life that brings you genuine satisfaction. That's the real happy ending. Not finding a partner, but finding yourself and living authentically. Until next time, take care of yourself, trust your wisdom, and never apologize for choosing peace over compromise.